Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the latest credit card statement with growing unease. A $3,200 charge at a luxury watch boutique. A $1,500 dinner at an upscale restaurant he'd never been to. Plane tickets, two of them, booked under his wife's name but not for any trip they had planned together. His fingers tightened around the paper as a cold realization crept into his gut. These weren't his purchases. He hadn't bought a watch. He hadn't enjoyed a lavish meal with his wife, Olivia. And those plane tickets? He sure as hell hadn't booked a romantic getaway. A deep breath, calm, logical, strategic. That was how Daniel had always handled problems. Olivia, on the other hand, had always been impulsive, craving luxury, chasing fleeting moments of pleasure, and now, it seemed, she was indulging in those desires on his dime with someone else. His mind raced as he methodically pulled up their bank records. There it was. Weeks, maybe even months of deceit hiding in plain sight. Designer suits, hotel stays, jewelry. Daniel wasn't a fool. These weren't gifts for herself. His heart pounded, but not with heartbreak, not yet. First came the need to know everything. Daniel grabbed his laptop, pulling up their shared accounts. He checked logins, receipts, cross-referencing dates and locations with Olivia's so-called business trips and late-night meetings. With each new piece of evidence, the truth cemented itself. Her betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. And that was something Daniel could work with. He closed the laptop, exhaling slowly. The anger was there, simmering beneath the surface, but he wouldn't let it dictate his next move. Olivia thought she was untouchable, that she could siphon his money into another man's hands without consequence. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Daniel picked up his phone, scrolling to the number of an old college friend, a financial lawyer who specialized in asset protection and fraud cases. This wouldn't be a simple divorce. No, Daniel had something far more devastating in mind. He wasn't just going to leave Olivia. He was going to destroy everything she had built at his expense. Before he made the call, he heard the front door open. Olivia walked in, humming softly, setting her designer handbag on the counter as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, babe," she said, flashing a smile. "I was thinking of redecorating the living room. Maybe a new couch, something more modern. What do you think?" Daniel forced a smile, nodding. "I think that sounds like a great idea." Inside, his mind was already calculating the steps. He had all the proof he needed. The accounts would be frozen soon. The debts? Oh, she would take every last one of them. He would play along for now. But soon, Olivia would wake up to a very different reality. Daniel played the part of the clueless husband perfectly. He continued his routine, leaving for work at the same time, answering Olivia's text as usual, even smiling when she mentioned plans for a girls' weekend. In reality, every moment was calculated. Every step he took was bringing him closer to dismantling Olivia's carefully constructed lie. He started with the finances. After his call with his lawyer friend, Daniel had a solid plan. He met with the bank the next morning, his suit impeccable, his voice calm. The bank manager, an older man who had handled their joint accounts for years, greeted him warmly. "How can we help you today, Mr. Calloway?" Daniel slid a stack of paperwork across the polished desk. "I need to make some changes to our accounts." Over the next hour, he methodically secured his personal assets. He opened new accounts under his name alone, rerouted his direct deposits, and quietly transferred large sums into a separate trust Olivia had no access to. At the same time, he left just enough in their joint accounts to keep her from noticing, until it was too late. His next move was to lock her out of his credit. He filed a fraud alert with the credit bureaus, flagged every suspicious transaction, and had new cards issued in his name only. By the end of the day, Olivia's free-spending lifestyle was running on borrowed time. Still, Daniel knew that hitting her finances wasn't enough. He needed to make sure Olivia and her lover faced real consequences. That's when he got creative. He hired a private investigator, an old acquaintance who specialized in marital fraud cases. Within a week, Daniel had everything he needed. Photos of Olivia and Ryan at an expensive restaurant, shopping for suits and watches, and the cherry on top, checking into a luxury hotel together. The hotel receipt was in Olivia's name. The same card she shared with Daniel had paid for the room. Perfect. Daniel wasn't interested in a dramatic confrontation. That wasn't his style. He wanted Olivia to be trapped in a web of her own making, struggling to claw her way out while he walked away unscathed. The next step was timing. Waited for Olivia to dig herself in deeper. She continued spending, oblivious to the noose tightening around her. She even had the audacity to kiss him goodbye one morning before heading off to meet Ryan, her perfume clinging to his collar like an insult. Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he set the final phase into motion. With the help of his lawyer, he ensured that every dollar Olivia had spent in his name became legally her responsibility. He had proof of her unauthorized spending, and the bank agreed to reverse the fraudulent charges, placing the full weight of the debt on Olivia's shoulders. And just in case she thought she could weasel her way out, Daniel had one final move. He prepared a financial affidavit documenting every reckless transaction, every charge made to fund her affair. Then he contacted Ryan, sending him a friendly message with an attached summary of Olivia's dwindling finances. Hope you've been enjoying Olivia's generosity. Thought you'd like to know the bills are all hers now. Best of luck. Now, all that was left was to watch the dominoes fall. That evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table as Olivia walked in, smiling after what she likely thought was another successful day of deception. She poured herself a glass of wine, glancing at him over the rim. Daniel smiled. You have no idea. Daniel sat on the couch, the weight of his plans settling in his chest like an anchor. He had always been a man of precision, of careful calculation, and now every piece was falling into place. Olivia had no idea her world was on the verge of collapse. That night, she was her usual self, carefree, indulgent, completely unaware of the financial storm brewing over her head. She scrolled through her phone, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she lazily sipped a glass of red wine. She thought she was in control. She thought Daniel was oblivious. She was wrong. The next morning, Daniel left early, claiming he had an important meeting. In truth, he was meeting with his lawyer one last time before the final blow. By now, Olivia's access to his money was entirely severed. All joint accounts had been quietly drained, her cards were canceled, and every fraudulent transaction had been reversed in a way that left the debt in her name. But Daniel wasn't done. He had spent the last few days gathering everything: emails, text logs, bank statements, and, most importantly, proof that Olivia had committed financial fraud by using his credit without authorization. He wanted this to be airtight. He wanted to make sure she couldn't talk her way out of it, and he wasn't about to stop at the financial aspect. He had one more meeting that morning with Olivia's employer. Olivia had a well-paying corporate job, one that required an impeccable reputation. Her company had strict policies about ethical behavior, especially regarding financial impropriety. With his evidence in hand, Daniel had a simple conversation with HR. He didn't have to push too hard. Once they saw how Olivia had misused funds, even if they weren't company, her credibility was shattered. By the end of the day, Olivia's employment was, and she had no clue. Daniel made sure of that. That afternoon, he returned home and waited. Olivia arrived, tossing her purse onto the counter, humming to herself. How was your day? She asked casually, oblivious to the fact that it was probably the last normal day she'd have for a long time. Daniel smirked. Productive. She poured herself another glass of wine. He almost laughed. In a matter of hours, she'd be drinking boxed wine in a cheap apartment. If she could even afford that, then it happened. Her phone buzzed once, twice, 3 times, then silence. Daniel saw her face shift, confusion, then irritation. She tried again. Swipe, decline, swipe, declined. Then he watched her mask of confidence slip. She opened her banking app. He could almost hear the blood rushing from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, a sharp intake of breath. Then she clicked again. Again! Then she turned to him. Daniel! Her voice was suddenly different, softer, a touch of forced calm beneath the panic rising in her throat. Something's wrong with my cards. Daniel didn't blink. That so? She forced a laugh, shaking her head as she dialed the bank. I'm sure it's just fraud protection or something. Probably an error. Daniel watched as the call connected, listened as she went through the verification process. Then, I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway, the voice on the other end said, professional but firm. Your account has been flagged due to suspicious activity. Your available balance is currently 0. Olivia's eyes widened. 0? That doesn't make sense. What about my credit cards? There was a pause. All credit lines have been frozen pending fraud investigation. Olivia's hand tightened around the phone. Fraud investigation? She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, ma'am, the bank representative continued. We received a report from the primary account holder. Daniel sat back, stretching his arms over the couch. Olivia slowly turned to him. Who? She whispered. Me, Daniel confirmed. Her breathing quickened. You did this? I did, he said simply. She blinked, struggling to process what was happening. Why? Daniel tilted his head, feigning curiosity. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because my loving wife has been using my money to fund her affair? The color drained from her face. You you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, he cut in, his voice colder now. I understand that for months you've been playing me for a fool. I understand that you've been treating my money like an unlimited allowance while you run around with Ryan. I understand that you thought you could get away with it. Olivia swallowed hard. Daniel, let's talk about this. No. He interrupted. You don't get to talk your way out of this. You don't get to cry or make excuses, not this time. She gripped the edge of the counter, her nails digging into the marble. You can't just leave me with nothing. Daniel let out a small laugh. Oh, but I can. She tried again, reaching for a different tactic. Look, I know I messed up, but you don't want to ruin my life over this. You loved me once, didn't you? Daniel's expression hardened. That woman doesn't exist anymore. Then came the final blow. Oh, and you might want to check your email, he said casually. She frowned, fumbling with her phone. Seconds later, she gasped. Termination notice. Your employment has been reviewed, and due to ethical concerns, your position has been revoked. No, she whispered, her hands shaking. No. Daniel stood, grabbing his coat. Ryan's gonna love this, I'm sure. I sent him a little update, too. Wonder if he still thinks you're worth it now that you're broke. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she stared at the phone, her world collapsing around her. Daniel walked to the door, pausing just long enough to glance back. Good luck, Olivia. And with that, he walked out, leaving her to drown in the ruins of her own betrayal. Daniel stepped out into the crisp evening air, inhaling deeply. The weight that had been pressing against his chest for weeks was gone. His plan had unfolded perfectly, and Olivia was now standing amid the wreckage of her own choices. He wasn't surprised when his phone vibrated in his pocket. Olivia calling. He let it ring, then another call, then another. When it finally stopped, he checked his messages. Olivia, we need to talk. Olivia, Daniel, please answer me. Olivia, you've made your point. Okay, let's figure this out. Olivia, I'm sorry. Can we fix this? Daniel almost laughed. Fix this? The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Instead of responding, he pocketed his phone and headed toward the hotel where he had booked a suite for himself. He wasn't about to stay under the same roof as a woman who had been betraying him for months. He had left Olivia with no money, no job, and no access to his assets. She would soon realize that her life of luxury had been built on his foundation, and he had just pulled the entire thing out from under her. And Ryan, well, Daniel had made sure he knew the truth. A few hours later, Daniel sat in the hotel bar, sipping a whiskey, when a text came through from an unknown number. Ryan, what the hell did you do to Olivia? Daniel smirked. Perfect. He took his time before responding. Daniel, you mean what did Olivia do to herself? A few moments later, another message. Ryan, she's a mess. She said, you cut her off completely. She's trying to get me to pay her rent. Daniel chuckled to himself. The cracks were forming faster than he had anticipated. Daniel, I hope you enjoyed the gifts she bought you. They were expensive. Too bad the debt is all in her name now. There was no response for a while, and Daniel imagined Ryan sitting there, realization sinking in. He could almost see the expression, first confusion, then frustration, then panic. Ryan had never been in this for love. He was in it for the money, the lavish lifestyle Olivia provided him, and now that was gone. Less than an hour later, another message came through, this time from Olivia. Olivia, Ryan left me. Daniel exhaled slowly, shaking his head. He had expected Ryan to cut ties, but so soon, it was almost disappointing. He had hoped Olivia would suffer through a drawn-out rejection, watching as Ryan slowly distanced himself. But it seemed money truly had been the only thing holding their relationship together. A moment later, Olivia called again. This time, Daniel answered. Her voice was frantic, breathless. Daniel, please, I need to see you. He took a slow sip of his drink. Why? You can't just leave me like this. Her voice cracked. I know I messed up, but I can't do this alone. Daniel let her words hang in the air before responding. You seemed to be doing just fine alone when you were spending my money on another man. That's not fair, she shot back, her tone desperate. I made a mistake. No. Daniel interrupted, his voice cold. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something hurtful in the heat of an argument. What you did wasn't a mistake, Olivia. It was a series of choices. Repeated, deliberate choices. Silence. He could hear her shallow breathing, could almost picture her standing in the middle of their now empty house, clutching her phone with shaking hands. I don't have anywhere to go, she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The old him, the one who had loved Olivia, the one who had built a life with her, might have felt pity. But that man didn't exist anymore. You should have thought about that before you burned everything to the ground, he said simply. Daniel, please, I'll do anything, she pleaded. Just give me one more chance. He almost laughed at the irony. How many chances had she given him while she was sneaking around with Ryan? How many times had she looked him in the eyes and lied? I already gave you everything, he said, standing up from his seat. And you threw it away. He hung up, the final nail in the coffin. By the next morning, Olivia had tried reaching out in every possible way. Texts, calls, emails. She even showed up at his office, only to be turned away at reception. Daniel knew she wasn't reaching out because she loved him. She was reaching out because she needed him. There was a difference. But he wasn't done yet. With the help of his lawyer, he had already filed for divorce on grounds of financial and marital misconduct. Olivia wouldn't just lose access to his money. She'd walk away with nothing. No spousal support, no assets. The house? He had purchased it before their marriage, and the prenup ensured she had no claim to it. The car, also in his name. By the end of the day, Olivia received a legal notice informing her that she had 30 days to vacate the house. Her response was predictable. Olivia, you really doing this? Daniel, I already did. He imagined her sitting in the empty house, surrounded by the expensive furniture she had picked out, realizing that none of it truly belonged to her. And as for Ryan, word spread quickly. Daniel had shared just enough of Olivia's deceit with the right people, ensuring that Ryan's reputation took a hit as well. By the time Daniel was done, Ryan was a man without prospects. No wealthy girlfriend to bankroll his lifestyle, no reputation to fall back on. Daniel didn't care what happened to either of them. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. As he closed his laptop that evening, he poured himself a drink, stepping out onto the hotel balcony. The city lights stretched before him, a symbol of a new beginning. He had been blindsided once, but never again. Tomorrow, his new life would begin. And Olivia, she would spend the rest of hers paying for her mistakes. Daniel stood outside his home, no, his house. Olivia no longer had any claim to it. She had spent years treating it like her personal palace, filling it with luxury while secretly betraying the man who provided it all. And now it was time for her to leave. The movers had already come and gone. Olivia had 30 days to vacate, but Daniel doubted she would last that long. She had no income, no access to his money, and after Ryan's abrupt departure, no one left to fund her lavish lifestyle. A black sedan sat in the driveway, its trunk partially open as Olivia hastily stuffed the last of her designer bags inside. She looked different now, less composed, less confident. Her once perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her usual flawless makeup smudged. She was unraveling. Daniel leaned casually against the porch railing, watching her struggle to shove a Louis Vuitton suitcase into the car. He didn't offer to help. She finally turned, eyes locking onto his. So that's it? She asked, her voice tired. Daniel gave a small shrug. Looks like it. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. You really won't reconsider? He raised an eyebrow. Reconsider what? This us. She took a hesitant step closer. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I loved you, Daniel. I still do. Daniel studied her, the woman he had once trusted, the woman he had built a life with. And now? Now she was nothing more than a stranger. You don't love me, he said calmly. You loved what I could give you. The house, the money, the security. If you had loved me, you wouldn't have spent months sneaking around with another man. Olivia swallowed, her lips parting as if to protest, but she had no defense. Daniel took a slow step toward her. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice quiet but firm. If I had lost my job, if I had suddenly gone broke, would you have stayed? Silence. Her hesitation was all the answer he needed. Yeah, he nodded, stepping back. That's what I thought. Olivia's eyes filled with guilt, regret, maybe even shame. It was too late for all of that. She exhaled sharply, glancing toward the house one last time. I never wanted it to end like this. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent my money on another man. She flinched, but he felt no satisfaction in it, no anger, just finality. A car horn honked from the street. Olivia glanced over her shoulder, then back at Daniel. Guess this is goodbye. I guess so. She hesitated. Do you think we'll have a... No. His answer was immediate, final. Her shoulders slumped. Without another word, she climbed into the sedan, slamming the door shut. Daniel didn't watch her drive away. He didn't need to. As he turned back toward the house, his home, a sense of peace settled over him. He had lost something, sure, but in the end, he had gained something far greater. His freedom, his future. In Olivia, she had gotten exactly what she deserved.